Neil, hi, it's Thursday again.
Hey there, how are you?
I'm good. Boy, has it been a big week.
Can you believe it?
Yeah, I really can't. I really can't. And latest poll, Marquette University, which is not the most reliable poll, but it's good. It's about middle of the pack, is showing Kamala at 53%.
It's a stunning development. I mean, again, I think, what do polls mean these days? That's a part of a bigger question about just the methodology of these elections and polling accuracy. But obviously, that's better news than if it were not the case.
Right. And of course, all of those weeks of watching Joe Biden just sink, sink, sink. I think what's really interesting about this cycle is that we're getting a bounce even before the convention because
Yeah.
of this sort of weird, non traditional thing that's happened. And usually there's about a 10-point bounce after the convention. Trump has gotten no bounce.
Yeah, that's a great point. I hadn't thought about this as a sort of pre-convention boom, or at least bounce for the Democratic ticket leading into that convention. And it'll be interesting to see if the convention gives the Democrats the same sort of bounce that they normally have, or if that like some of that bounce has already been gained through what's happening right now. If there's just sort of like a built-in bounce that a ticket gets when sort of all the media focuses on it, or if the convention is actually additive to where we stand today.
Yeah, I think that's right. And of course, as anyone on Twitter would remind us, at this point in 2016, Hillary was double digits ahead of
Yeah.
Trump. So keep volunteering, keep donating, keep buying t shirts, people. We're not there yet. So, Neil, we're going to talk about Tim Walz today, but there was kind of a sad daddy story that you were quoted in. I was so thrilled to see you in the New York Times this morning about the eastern end of Long Island, which we New Yorkers call the Hamptons. And actually, probably people around the nation know the Hamptons as this sort of very Tony vacation spot that not just New Yorkers, but people around the country come to. And you, Neil, are becoming an expert in Hampton's history. Can you tell the story of what happened to this poor family on Long Island?
Yeah, it's a terrible story, written incredibly and really tragically by the always wonderful Katie Roseman of the New York Times. It's about this man, Brandon Miller, and his wife, Candace Miller. Brandon Miller is a sort of son of a big deal real estate developer in New York City, and they lived this incredibly flashy, ostentatious lifestyle, in large part, I think, driven by the wife, Candace Miller, and her sort of online presence. She runs this very popular Instagram account called Mama and Tata that is basically a showcase of their over the top life. And a lot of that focuses on what they do out in the Hamptons at their weekend home, and the incredible, parties they throw, and the fashion, and the, on and on and on. Brandon Miller died by suicide over the summer because it turns out that their lifestyle was, had them really deeply in debt. That his career, that there had been a lot of financial, a lot of bad deals had gone down in his career, and that they were way overextended. And so it's just this tragic story of, the facade of wealth and opulence that was being shown online and also lived in person in the Hamptons and Manhattan, and how that all has just come crashing down. And so I commented on sort of what it meant that, his death occurred at the height of the social season, the middle of the summer, the July 4th weekend, actually, in the Hamptons of all places.
Yeah, it is a very sad story. And one of the things that struck me about it is how age of Trump it is. That, there was this wealth that was built on sand, on
Right.
debt, on buying buildings and borrowing money to buy more buildings that he thought he was going to flip, but he never really could. It was like this pyramid scheme, really. But it didn't involve so many people. There were some friends of his that were involved. When are we going to get out of this age of Trump where people just want to be wealthy for the sake of showing off?
I mean, I think in some ways that is a deeply American, personal or a deeply American just habit. Although obviously one and magnified, I think, in our Trump age and also in our social media age, and the way that sort of the Trump political moment and our social media moment are converging and sort of one and the same, and yeah, obviously, very overlapping. Um, Trump may or may not go away, but I think this spirit certainly seems like it's here to stay, even as it ruins, I think, one life after another.
Yeah, it's a real reality show kind of thing, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I wish we had our friend and your writing partner Natalia Petrozelli here, because one of the things that struck me about this story is this woman was doing workouts that
yeah.
cost $250 an hour.
Hmm.
I mean, what was that about?
Right. Yeah. Right. And that was part of the showiness of it all, right? Like that
Yeah.
all of this is about sort of one-upping each other, and especially in an elite and rarefied world of the Hamptons, like you have to keep pushing the limits of how you're able to even one up, when you're talking about multimillionaires and even billionaires as your neighbors. And so this couture, private client fitness aspect is one of the ways you do it. And certainly Natalia would have some interesting thoughts about that particular dimension of it. But this woman was doing that in sort of every different, aspect of life: clothing, jewelry, party giving, on and on and on.
Yeah, I mean, really scary. I'm going to link to this article for our viewers, because it's just such a great piece, and you have such wonderful things to say about it. And it's a great contrast with our new Democratic vice presidential
Hmm.
candidate, Tim Walz, who is like a real guy, from Minnesota. He's the governor of Minnesota. He seems to delight in doing things like bass fishing. And I actually read something on Twitter that said when he did his interview with Kamala Harris, he came out of the Naval Observatory and somebody was mowing the lawn. And he walked over to the guy and said, I don't like the knock that I'm hearing from that lawnmower.
Oh,
And he
okay.
sort of got down on his knees and took the cover off. And so in contrast to this showy, Trumpy, gilded kind of politics, we've got Tim Walz. What was your response to this pick by Kamala Harris?
Well, I was a little surprised by it, to tell you the truth. I just thought that all the momentum seemed to be going in the Shapiro direction. And if anything, that like the sort of surprise candidate was made, our surprise pick was going to be Mark Kelly from Arizona. Although I understand why, given Arizona wasn't a state that they wanted to lose a Senate seat in, I think that was part of why he wasn't chosen. But I was surprised by it. I was also really happy about it because it seemed to bring in an energy and a personality that we haven't seen in a long time in American politics. I think what you've sort of hinted to with this sort of Midwestern, um, all shucks, good old boy, whatever the way daddy, all the things that have been said about him, but also combined with this fascinating, political history that is very much a part of Minnesota's history of, this Midwestern progressive. And I think it's sort of he's a fascinating person for us to delve into, and also I think a really electrifying person for this ticket, which is not something you often say about the VP pick. Certainly not what people are saying about JD Vance.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And Walt seems to have this exuberance. I saw a picture today of him greeting Joe Biden several months ago. Biden gets off the plane and Waltz has his arms outstretched and his suit jacket is like pulled up over his shoulders. He's got his arms up so high. So this idea that this is a huggy guy, there's another
Yeah.
picture of him signing a universal free breakfast and free lunch program bill, which he got through the legislature in Minnesota. And after he signed the bill, all these kids are like gathered around him in a group hug. I can't imagine either Trump or Vance hugging children. Can you?
No, not in any way that feels natural or doesn't like set off all our alarm bells. But that video is incredible. I watched it over and over again on Twitter. I think, I imagine it's being, you know, slot into lots of campaign commercials that we're about to see all the time. And all of it seems authentic. And I think that's really important here. That it seems not a show, but just really who this person is. And also deeply connected to, again, the policies that he has put forward as governor of Minnesota. And also, we should, say as a person who served in Congress for, I think it was 6 terms. So I think that's also sort of an interesting political biography and certainly political resume that he brings to this ticket, having had experience in DC in Congress representing a very rural district of Minnesota, and then also a 2-term very popular governor of this state that is notable in so many ways, not only because it's in the Midwest, but all the different sectors of its economy that I think are going to allow him to speak in really interesting ways on the campaign trail.
Yeah, I think that's right. And when he was first elected governor of Minnesota, you may not know, viewers, that northern Minnesota, where I've spent a lot of time, it's called the Iron Range, is extremely conservative, and it's a post-industrial area. It was a mining area full of Swedes and Finns and Germans, and very sort of white working class, left behind kind of place. And Walz won all those counties
Yeah.
the
Mhm.
first time he ran. So that's a good sign. I thought it was kind of going in the Shapiro direction too, but when you look at it, and you said some of this, Neil, Kamala Harris has 6 years of relationships in the Senate. Walz has 12 years of relationships in Congress, plus now 2 terms being governor, relationships to all the governors across the nation.
Mhm.
And the Governors Association is a really, really important network of people. So it all makes sense. But people keep talking about his daddy vibes. What do they mean by that, Neil?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. I mean, let's just take it sort of straight first. I think that this is a
Oh,
guy
no.
that is, I mean, the fascinating thing is he and Harris are the exact same age, and he reads as like a good 15 years older. And he said, that was partly from him having, I think, spent 2 decades overseeing, the school lunchroom, which I thought was a great line. But, completely white hair, wrinkled face, a bit of a paunch, and obviously has kids that he's very close to, his own children, who he's spoken about at length. And I think that's, again, another wonderful thing for a VP candidate to be talking about, especially when JD Vance is so weird about his own children. So there's all that. And the high school coach thing, I'm really into the coach angle of this all too, and I think that the coach and the daddy sort of reinforce a lot of this image making that's happening around him. And he's also emerged, I have to say, you may have noticed this, Claire, on gay Twitter as another daddy type. The gays
Oh,
are
yeah.
into him,
Oh,
which
yeah.
is interesting too, but and maybe not what the campaign will lead with, but worth at least us noting.
Oh, he's totally a daddy, a gay daddy. And I would say the other thing that sort of speaks to is he's got a really good record on LGBT stuff, right?
Yeah, I was actually fascinated by this. And it's not just, what he's done as governor in a state that I think, is known, especially on cultural issues, to be very liberal and has had a good, has been one of those states that have been at the forefront of LGBTQ issues. But like this goes back to when he was a high school teacher in the 90s, being the founding member or the sponsoring teacher of the first Gay Student Alliance at his rural high school in Minnesota. I mean, it is that's something I think a lot of us might take for granted. You hear like, oh, he founded the Gay Straight Alliance at his high school. We're so far from the history of what wasn't that long ago. I think we're far from it in our minds of
Right.
how far we've come. And yet it wasn't that long ago that such things were really difficult. And that he did this in a rural high school in Minnesota in the 90s when there were high schools in, suburban Boston or California that couldn't get these things instituted is really remarkable.
Yeah, and it makes me think that he's really got zeroing in on, let's say, the ways in which Republicans have really targeted gay and trans kids. They don't seem to be brave enough to target gay and trans adults yet,
Mm.
although I think we can be confident that they will when they think they can. But it's really kids they've gone after, right?
Yeah, and it's clear that that's one of the big talking points that the Republicans have lined up for their attacks on Walz. I think the record is not quite what Republicans are making it out to be. There's a little bit more nuance than they're characterizing, but yeah, he's been a very progressive leader on a lot of these issues, including I think what I don't know if this is the right word, but these sort of safe haven laws that Minnesota has passed that include things like, the state won't honor a subpoena or, an extradition notice that other states might send to folks who come to Minnesota for, whatever care that they're looking for. And so it'll be interesting to see. I think that this will probably be the main line of attack against Walz. Also, I think, this stuff over his military service, which is ridiculous, but clearly something that they're going to try and showboat, or excuse me, swift boat. Wallace again, was so effective, obviously, about against John Kerry back in the day.
Yeah, and of course, the guy that orchestrated the Swift Boat campaign is one of Trump's campaign advisors. So he knows how to do that. I think the part that's interesting to me, Neil, is that the Republicans, and I've noticed this with the sort of journalists that pipe out MAGA propaganda and so on, they keep putting this stuff out there and none of it's really sticking.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting. And I want to know what you think about that. But the other thing that I think is interesting is that the normal thing to do after your convention is tack back to the center. We
Right.
know that Trump cannot win this election without getting those uncommitted voters. And yet the campaign seems to be doubling down on only speaking to their base. So what
Well,
do you make of that?
I want to hear what you have to say about things not sticking, but I'll speak to the latter point, which is I wonder if this is. I mean, you're right. Like that's what you do historically, right? You sort of feed meat to the base at the convention. You pull back to the center for as you move into the general election for capturing those swing voters, independents, et cetera. And I wonder if the the fact that the Trump campaign is not doing this at all is a reflection of how isolated those who are left in the Trump world are from even the rest of the Republican um, machine. And if this has just become a sort of bubble that cannot see to any sort of reality or even sort of political convention anymore. And also that this is just a reflection of Trump's personality, and that his personality and his really chaos mind is trumping, if you will, any sort of traditional political strategy that would be in place. I mean, is it just that is this a reflection of the remaining few around him just being total Trump sycophants, and that like there's no traditional GOP operative in there to redirect the ship?
Well, the part that surprises me is, of course, his chief campaign strategist is Susie Wiles, who
Mm-hmm.
is brilliant. We don't love Susie Wiles, but we all have to admit that she's brilliant. I mean, she basically chased the Democratic Party out of Florida.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. So I'm not, I keep imagining Susie Wiles just like, sticking a fork in an electrical socket every time she gets foiled. But I think, the other piece of it about things not sticking is I think there is something about the exuberance about Harris and Waltz that means that Democrats are not amplifying MAGA attacks. We're sort of looking at them and
Yeah.
thinking, well, that's dumb.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that change in my own brain. I mean, like when they started posting his mugshot for the DUI, in sometime in the 1990s. And this story later came out. Yes, he'd been arrested and he stopped drinking and he hasn't had a drink since, and so on. And I thought to myself, I didn't even respond to it because I thought, how many people in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan have had a DUI? How many guys had a few too many beers regularly for years and then woke up one day and realized that their lives were in the toilet and stopped?
Right.
So, it's like a normal human experience to have that
This
happen, you
isn't
know?
that also like at the heart of George W. Bush's own biography, right? Like this
Right.
moment, like, oh, that, and this is something that again is usually held up as admirable, right? There's this crisis moment that brings about a turning point and changes a person, and then their life is, never the same after. And so, I mean, he'll be lucky if if JD Vance brings that up in a VP debate, because it just allows him to, tell the story in a way that I think relates to every American out there, and certainly the lots and lots of people who've been in a similar situation. And I think you put your finger on, you said the word that I think is really important here, which is exuberance. Like the other one I was thinking is joy. Like I am
Yeah.
struck by the joy that that Harris and Walz now, adding to, convey through their own just personality and the way that they're showing up at these rallies, but also the joy that I think has been contagious for Democrats. And I think that joy is undercutting a lot of the fears about what this, how this election is going to play out, that make those Republican attacks seem almost silly, and certainly pretty futile. I'm also
Yeah.
struck by, there was this moment with JD Vance earlier in this week where a reporter asked him what makes him smile. And can you imagine an easier softball question in American politics than political candidate, what makes you smile? Like, you say your family, you idiot. And
Right.
he raged and ranted. And I don't know if their strategy is like, we'll give Democrats joy and we'll take the anger alley, but like that's never ever a good choice in American politics. It's wild.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And to get back to daddy, angry daddy is no
Mm,
fun.
right.
And angry daddy is traumatizing. And Trump's modus operandi for, since 2015 has been to be angry, angry, angry daddy. And the world is scary, the world is horrible, everybody hates you, and I'm going to protect you. And I think Tim Walz's daddy does what daddy is supposed to do, which is he doesn't talk about the scary things. He doesn't frighten you. He just says, I'm going to give you a hug and it's all going to be okay. And why don't you come along with me and help me?
And he also
And that's
fixes
what
the lawnmower.
and he fixes a lawnmower. I saw someone on Twitter saying, when they send Waltz out canvassing, he'll probably like check the fluids on your car
Yeah.
before he leaves.
Well, I'm loving all the Twitter stuff. Like I just can't get enough of it.
Yeah.
And I had this moment yesterday where I saw my husband, as you know, is from the Midwest. He's from Ohio, and I saw him in the backyard yesterday, like at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, just using our leaf blower, which I didn't even know we owned a leaf blower, let alone know how to use. He just like cleaning up the backyard yesterday afternoon, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm married to Tim Walz. Like the Midwest is making even more sense to me. But yeah, I think that yes, this daddy thing, I think it's like competence and compassion combined. Like that's the energy he's giving off. Like I can fix things, I'm capable, and also I'm not going to make you feel bad about yourself. Like I'm not here to like ruin anyone's day. And so I think it's especially an effective combination for a VP candidate to have. Because at the end of the day, like the VP isn't really shaping policy, right? I mean, like all
Right.
the talk about where he falls on the political spectrum, does it actually matter once this election, once even
Right.
if they win the election? Although I think it's, again, worth talking about when we think about its historical significance.
Yeah, yeah, and I think we haven't mentioned Tim Walz's wife Gwen,
Mm,
but she's an educator as well. And I think one of the great things that Jill Biden did in the last 4 years was bring education into the White House. And we don't have as many changes in education policy as I would like, I'm sure as you would like, but it was always in the conversation, and I think continuing that is going to be really important in a Harris Walz administration.
yeah, definitely.
So, Neil, thanks so much for sitting with me. Listeners, you're going to see us again next week as we help you decipher all of the important things that are happening in this very, very exciting campaign. Neil, thanks so much.
Great to see you. Talk to you next week.
Okay.